What's going on, everyone? You're watching Wild Fed Family, and right in front of me I have a hindquarter from a doe that I harvested 7 days ago. And I wanted to start with the hindquarter because there's a couple different things that goes into this. A lot of people look at this and get confused about the different muscle groups, how to use them, how to cook them, how to even locate them. And what I want to break down is the 7 components that this hindquarter is made up of. I want to walk you through it so that you know where to find them, how to use them, and what they're supposed to look like in the muscle and when they're trimmed out and cleaned up. Now, I did not want to show you the skinning, field dressing, etc., but if you want to see that, go ahead and check out my Facebook Reels, and there's plenty of that kind of content on there. But for now, we're sticking with this piece of meat in the kitchen, and I'm going to show you how to break it down. So now you got a closer look at it, and the first thing that I'm gonna do is go ahead and trim this up while it's on the bone. You can do this after you separate the muscle groups, but I find it easier and more maneuverable when I have the whole piece of meat that I can wrestle around with. So let me get started on that. And all I'm doing here is taking off some of this fat cap and getting it down to the meat. So you're just barely getting into it, and you can see there's a very minimal amount of meat left on that. The most important thing when doing this is making sure that you have a sharp knife and the right knife for the job. And what I'm using right now is a 7.5 inch Rapala fillet knife. It's probably my favorite all-around knife, and I have no affiliation with them, but I've used this knife for years. It's comfortable in my hand, it's flexible when you need it to be, and it's also firm when you need it to be. It's easy to keep a blade, and that's what I like using. So as you can see, just the majority of this big stuff, that's all I'm working on. And let your knife follow the underside of that fat, and you'll feel it just float. It's hard to describe, but once you do it, you'll understand. So I don't want to get too carried away. Like I said, just the big stuff. So let's move that to the side and flip it over. Now on the other side, you'll see a major color difference between right here and right here. And what I do is I hang my deer in the cooler with the hide on for 7 days minimum. 7 to 14 days is what I go for. 14 is on the long end. Once I skin it, I take the quarters and I let them hang in there for 1 more day and let it dry out. But this is where the hide was not covering, and this is where the hide was covering. All of this rind right here needs to come off. If I were to leave the hide on it, I would have to do just that right there to the entire deer, and I don't want to do that. There's meat waste and wasted time, in my opinion. And if you're wondering, my deer do cool down rapidly. I have my cooler set to 38 degrees, and I monitor the temperature of the femur, and I make sure at minimum it is down to 40 degrees within 24 hours, but it never takes me that long. It's usually about 12 to 16 hours. 16 hours being a larger deer, big buck, and that's plenty cool, plenty fast, and there's no issues with that. So same thing on this side, just a rough trimming, get the majority of this big stuff off, and we'll flip it over and start breaking down the rest of it. All right, so I got all the big stuff off, pretty well cleaned up, and we're gonna start breaking this down. And you can do it 2 ways. You can debone it completely and break the muscle groups up, or you can leave it on the bone like I like doing, because I found that if you leave it on the bone, you always have that orientation of where that muscle group is sitting, rather than a lump of deboned meat and you're trying to figure out which is which is harder to do when you're just starting this out. So first off, there's a line that comes right up in between that front muscle group and this long strip one, and that's what we're gonna take off first. This is the bottom round, and we're gonna start by following that line and just putting a nick in it. And you can see, you can stick your fingers in there and follow it all the way down, just peeling it back. And these muscle groups will separate very easily. Just run your blade through there. Like you can see, I'm just peeling it back with my hands, and you'll find that natural seam. And you're just gently running your knife down in it. Once you get down here to the kneecap, you just keep on following that, and you'll see that muscle split between the shank muscle and this bottom round. Keep on following it down, peel it back, and loosen it up. Just work it all the way down. Same thing right through here. And once I get to about that point, I'll make a clean, straight cut. Now, keep on pulling it up towards the hip bone. And this up here is the only place that it's attached to the bone. And you just kind of gotta just barely touch it with your knife, and it peels right off. Now you have two muscle groups right here. There is the eye of round, and this is the bottom round. And there's a very distinct color difference between these two muscle groups. This eye of round is a very light color, and I'm just gonna go through, and there's also a natural seam in between these two, and you just follow it down, separate these two muscle groups. So there you have it. The bottom round and the eye of round. Let's set those to the side, and I'm gonna keep breaking down the rest. The next muscle group that I like to tackle is this sirloin tip. And I'm gonna start right here, right where you see that tendon end up, and it's just above the kneecap. You can feel the lump of that bone right there. And I put my knife down, and I'll cut straight down. And I cut straight down until I hit that bone. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna follow that muscle group on this side until it kind of tees out at that tendon line. And that's the same thing I'm gonna do. I'm gonna push my knife down, roll it around the bone. So now you've got your ends freed up, and you can actually feel the bone right here. You just take the tip of your knife and work your way down along that bone. Just very gently. You don't need to do any hacking or sawing. Just put a little back pressure on that muscle, and it'll peel away very easily. Once you get to the end, just run your knife down, and the whole muscle comes out. And that right there is your sirloin tip. All right, moving on. And if I'm going too fast, go ahead and just hit the rewind button, take your time, and try to memorize this stuff. Or the best way to do it is just do it yourself, and it'll all start to make sense. Now, the third muscle, well, I guess fourth muscle that I'm gonna remove is gonna be the top round. But before we do that, there's this lump of fat and tendon and artery that runs right up through here. Well, that's not just a lump of fat, that's actually a gland right there. So I like to take that gland out while it's exposed and before I take out this top round. So there, that's gone. All right, this is the top round. And you can see a very defined muscle striations. We just peel that back just like we did with all the other muscle groups, and it exposes it. Just work the seams down all the way down to the bone. It's down to the bone. Once again, just gently run my knife along the bone, and it all just peels away. If you got to flip back and forth, and make sure you're getting a clean cut. Do it one more time. Now, just like the bottom round, this is also attached up here to the hip bone. I just take the tip of my knife and work all of the little grooves and just gently feel it with the tip of my knife and pull it away. And that right there is your venison top round. All right, so everything is cleared away from this femur, and you actually have two more muscle groups up here. So there's a triangle piece, just like everything else. It has seams. God gave you lines, you just got to follow them. So you take that triangle piece, follow it down, split your seams. Same thing right at the top. It's attached at the hip. And that right there is actually your venison tri-tip. You can attempt to cook this like a beef tri-tip, but most likely it's going to dry out and it's just small. So I typically end up putting this in the grinder pile, but I haven't always done it. So if you want to experiment with your venison tri-tip, there it is. That's how you find it. The last muscle group I have up here is the rump roast. And I always like to start by finding this joint right in the hip, and you just roll your knife right around it and free it up. And it's just sitting there right up on the hip bone. So I just take my knife, gently run it along the bone, and peel it away clean. And that's your rump roast. If you like, you can cut this into steaks, or you can simply just cube it up, use it for stew meat, or throw it in a crock pot and make a roast with it. So this is what I have left. I have the hip bone, I have the femur exposed, and I have this rear shank that's just hanging on to all of this. Now, all I'm gonna do is separate these bones, and you don't need anything fancy. You don't need saws. All of this can be done with a knife. You just gotta follow the seams, and all the bones and joints come right apart. So there's your hip bone, and the same thing with the shank. And I really just peel this muscle back. There's your kneecap. And you just follow all these joints, grooves, and take your time, but you'll end up getting through it all. Another reason why I like this fillet knife is that it has a pretty strong and pointy tip, and you're able to get it in all of the grooves and crevices that some other knives won't get in, like that. You can see the joint right there, and I just put that knife in and work my way around it. There it is. If you give it a little twist, it exposes all those tendons, and that femur comes out clean. Like I said, I peeled back this kneecap earlier, and that right there can be trimmed off, go in the trimming pile, and go to the dogs. So there's your rear shank, your femur, and your hip bone. Now this is it. I'm gonna start on the end here. You saw me take out the top round. This is your bottom round. That's your sirloin. That's your eye of round. Tri-tip, rump roast, shank, femur, and hip bone. But now I gotta go ahead and fine tune all this, trim off all the little bits, and I'm gonna speed that up for you. So watch this. All right, so I have all of these trimmed up, and I'm gonna start with the top round. And that's it. And you can actually see there's basically two different muscle groups. Now this top round is excellent for steaks, roasts. I mean, you can slow cook it or slice it, cook it hot and fast. Do the same thing, sear it, cook it hot and fast, cook it to a low internal temperature, slice it like a prime rib. This is a great steak to keep at a low temperature. And I'm actually gonna go ahead and slice this open for you so that you can see what I'm talking about. And there you go. You can get some beautiful steaks out of this cut. This right here is your bottom round. Your bottom round is best for slow cooked roasts. And the reason that I say that is that there's just a lot of intramuscular tendons and sinews in here that you can't see. It looks great. You can cook it for steaks, and I have done in the past. I'm gonna do the same thing. I like to cut straight across the grain, so I'm gonna cut it at an angle. And you can see you'd also get plenty of great steaks out of that cut as well. This is your sirloin tip cleaned up. And I actually pulled off some of these smaller muscles that are attached to the bottom, and I use those to cube up for ground or stew meat. This is also great for steaks, and one of the best things you can do with this is make jerky, cube it up. You can do whatever you want. This is a pretty versatile cut. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut that in half so that you can see the steaks that you can get out of this. This is your eye of round all cleaned up. And the eye of round, if you're eating by yourself, that's a great piece to eat. You can cook it at a semi-low temperature to a medium rare, and go ahead and slice it up and have little meat medallions. Or you can cook it low and slow, use it in the grinder. Your tri-tip, like I said, once you get it trimmed up, it is very small. You can't really do a whole lot with it. If you have a collection of these, go ahead and marinate them. Flip them back and forth a couple times on super hot heat on the grill, and you'll have some great tacos. Your rump roast. Earlier I said you could go ahead and cut steaks out of it, and I'll go ahead and show you a cross cut. And there's the cross cut of that. Typically what I do is cube this up and use it for stew meat, or I send it through the grinder. Now your shank. I'm gonna leave this shank exactly like you see it, minus these little bits of fat. And the reason why I do that is because all of this silver skin and tendons and sinews, as it cooks down, is gonna turn gelatinous and very collagen rich. And this is probably my favorite, not my favorite, one of my favorite cuts to slow cook. And it will end up giving you a silky smooth, collagen rich broth that is just really hard to match. And yes, I do save my bones. So right here I have my femur and my hip bone. These I use to make stocks. I'll go ahead and freeze them away, and if you want to get the most out of these, I suggest that you take your femur or any bone and cut it right in half so it allows all of that marrow to seep out and the flavor to get in whatever stock that you're cooking down. And you're probably thinking that I'm crazy for cutting all of these in half. Well, this right here is the 5th deer that I've harvested this year, and I have plenty of these cuts that are all vacuum sealed as is, ready to go in the freezer. And if you're wondering why I went through the pain of trimming this all up, well, there's 2 reasons. One, I wanted to get all the fat off of it, because even if you do something different with it, you don't want the fat mixed in, because it's going to give you a paraffin wax type feel in your mouth. And secondly, I don't want all of the sinews clogging the grinder. And I say the grinder because that's exactly what I'm going to do with this. I got a bunch of sausage projects coming up, and I'm going to go ahead and cube this all up and throw it into sausage. Sorry if it breaks your heart. I got plenty of other stuff in the freezer, these same cuts in the freezer that I'll use for other stuff. But right now I've stocked up on the roast. You can always take your roast and break them down for sausage, but you can't break them down and turn them back into roast. So this is what we got here, and yeah, you got a lot of versatility in the hindquarter. So I am on a mission to show you guys exactly what to do with all of these cuts. I've given you a recipe for the sous vide experiment on the bottom round, and I'm gonna work my way all the way down through here. So keep on watching, stay tuned, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the tree stand or in the kitchen.